Welcome to this video where we'll be discussing CSS Flex. And Flex, like CSS Grid, allows us to lay out items, but in Flex's case, that we are only worried about laying out items in one dimension, whereas CSS Grid does 2 dimensions. Also with Flex, the size of the content kind of determines the way things are laid out, whereas CSS Grid kind of does a top-down layout approach and determines the size that the content should be. So just like CSS Grid, we have a container that has several items inside of it, and these don't have to be div tags. They can be header tags, nav tags, main tags, and you can mix and match them. You could have a heading tag, an H1 tag, and a paragraph tag inside of there. But with the parent container tag, to do Flex, you just use display Flex. And as you can see, Flex automatically lays out items along a row, and it's also only one dimension. Now you can change it and make it lay out items along a column by using the Flex direction and setting that to column. And now the items are laid out in a column.
Now you can also do column reverse, which means that the first item shows up at the bottom and the rest of the items work their way towards the top. There's also a row reverse, and that means the first item starts out on the right side and the rest of the items work their way towards the left. And the default value is just row, where the items start on the right side or on the left side and work their way towards the right. Now, if you notice when we talked about CSS Grid, I never played with the padding or the width because the CSS Grid determined the size of the items. But Flex is the opposite. The items determine their size, and then Flex helps them lay out on the screen the way we want to. So by default, if our items are a certain width, if you notice as I shrink the display or the window size, the items are kind of forced to shrink up. And eventually what happens when we make it small enough is we'll get a scroll bar and we'll have to scroll side to side. And that's because the default for the Flex wrap is no wrap, meaning the items cannot wrap around on a different row, or if we're doing columns, they can't wrap onto a different column. But if we change that and make it so that they can wrap, then that will allow the items to wrap around onto a different row. And as the window gets smaller, you can see that the items will start, when they don't have enough room up over here, they'll wrap down onto the next line. Now there is a shortcut. Instead of doing both Flex direction and Flex wrap, you can just do a Flex flow with the direction first and the wrap second. So this is a way to set both of those properties in a single line. Now another thing you can do is you can add a gap. And if you don't want a gap in both the column and the rows, there's a column gap and a row gap. Now, a lot of times we want to justify our content, and we can justify our content at the end. And with a bigger screen, we can see that all of these items have been pushed off to the right, whereas at the start, they're all pushed off to the left. There's also Flex Start and Flex End, and that's where the Flex begins. So usually the Flex begins on the left side and works its way to the right. But if we're doing row reverse, then the Flex Start is over here, and the Flex End is over here, whereas the start is always on the left and the end is always on the right. Now, if we do space between for our justify content, then the free space that we have left over will get divided up evenly and placed between our items. And the space around means that the free space that we have gets divided up, and we also place it in front of and behind the first and last items. And there's plenty more that you can do with CSS, but that's all I'll demonstrate in this video.